Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Appreciate you joining me here on the podcast for another week. Before I get into today's topic, I would just like to ask you a few massive favors. Please make sure you're subscribed on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. You'll find the podcast on all the major podcast platforms: Apple, Spotify, Google. Jump on there, give us a subscribe or a follow, and if you're able to and you enjoy the content that I am putting out, please make sure you give me a 5-star review, because by doing that, it helps the podcast climb the charts and get into the ears of more people who'll hopefully find some value from this, just like yourself. You'll also be able to find the video versions of this on YouTube and on the Facebook page. The video versions go up every Wednesday, so jump on and give us a subscribe or a follow on those pages as well. This week, being that it is going to be the very last episode of 2023, I'm going to talk about implementing changes. Now, obviously, this is something that I have worked with a lot of people on over the last 15 years. There's always a running joke or a running reel of memes that goes on the internet through New Year's about one where you'll see a gym with no one in it in December, and then in January it's got like a Royal Rumble style picture of people getting thrown out of a wrestling ring and just people everywhere and so on and so forth. And the podcast episode today is not about demonizing New Year's resolutions. I actually think, having seen it over a lot of years, it can hold a lot of value and a lot of weight for people if you implement it in a way which is going to be sustainable for you long term. But the problem that I see a lot is that a lot of people don't actually implement it in a sustainable way. What they do is they clear out everything to try and make the perfect circumstance for them to change, and then they're able to do that for a couple of weeks. It might be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever the case might be. But then eventually, because they've been prioritizing the actions that they need to take and prioritizing training, nutrition, whatever the case might be for that short period of time, and pushing other important things to the side, eventually those important things that they've been pushing to the side, whether it's work, whether it's family or things like that, have to come back into the view of the person, or they have to start prioritizing them again. Then the things that they've been doing within those challenges, so 6-week, 8-week, 12-week challenges, have to then get pushed to the side, and they lack the skills to actually implement those changes in a way which is going to fit in with the rest of their lives. Now, I'm not a massive, as you can probably tell from what I've just gone through, I'm not a massive fan of 6-week, 8-week, or 12-week challenges. And the reason for that is what I've just gone through. The fact is, people will prioritize the things that they need to do through those periods in order to succeed at that challenge, which is perfectly fine. And some people will do that and they'll actually find a lot of success, and then on the back end they'll be able to transition that into daily life, and that's great. If you can do that, all power to you, and that is absolutely amazing. Go ahead and do that. But what I have seen is, more often than not, that's not the case. What 6 and 8 week or those challenges don't lack is they lack a transition phase to actually show you, all right, this is what we need to, how we need to implement these changes, so that we don't have other important things slipping off our plate, so that we're not foregoing time with our family in order to train, so that we're not, missing out on having to skip out on work early and do things like that. We've got to look at it from a holistic point of view, and how to implement that change in a way where it is going to be conducive with the rest of our life and not cause friction in other areas that are going to be important to us. And we need to make sure that if we're doing these things, we're able to implement them back into quote unquote normal life. Now, when I say normal is going to look different after you've implemented something new. Like, that's going to be your new normal. So normal maybe isn't the right term, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. Is if we wait for the ideal situation or the ideal circumstance in order to make a particular change, then we're going to run into trouble at some point when something else comes up. And trust me, something will always come up. And I was having a conversation this week with one of my clients actually around this, where he was talking about the busy period that he's got coming up. You know, we've had Christmas, which is just gone at the time of publishing this video or this podcast. We've got New Year's, which is on the horizon. And then some of us aren't, or some people aren't going back to work for a couple of weeks. They're going to have family visiting. Like, all these things are going to happen, and all these moving pieces around this time of year. It seems like we've got a lot going on. And the conversation he was having is, I wanted to do this and I wanted to do that and da-da-da-da. And I kind of put it to him like, hey, even after this month period, is there still going to be something else coming up afterwards? And when he sat down, when he thought about it, like, yeah, there's always going to be something coming up. And if we keep putting it off and we keep putting off implementing this change that we want to make until it's 100% perfect, firstly, it may never happen. In this instance, when we were talking about it, it would just keep getting put off. And then all of a sudden, in 2024, we're then looking at, hey, we're in July, we're in August, we're in September. And then we're back into this festive period again. And then we're looking at 2025. And it's been another 12 months of just waiting for that perfect circumstance in order to make the change. And the change never happens. So that's the first thing that can happen. The second thing that can happen is, let's say, for example, maybe you do get a perfect 4 or 6 weeks where you're able to make this change. And that's great, and you make those changes consistently for that 4 to 6 weeks. But then something comes up. And then if you have only ever implemented something in an ideal circumstance and you haven't thought about what the contingencies are going to be if this comes up or if that comes up, it's going to be very easy for you just to fall into a heap, put it all in the too hard basket, and not continue with the change that you've made. So waiting for the ideal time to do it is probably, for a lot of people, not going to be the best approach, because we need to learn to implement these things in a way which is going to be conducive with a life that we enjoy, and with something that in a way that we are able to actually sustain it over a long period of time. Because you would have heard me speak about it on the podcast time and time again, when it comes to change, when it comes to training, consistency is going to be the biggest thing, which is going to lead to the best long-term results. Without consistency, nothing else matters. If we're talking about from a training point of view, you can have the most intense training sessions you want for a week or 2 weeks, but if you can't consistently maintain that volume, that intensity, and consistently put in the action, you're not going to see a long-term result. It's not going to stick. It's going to be something that will be there for short term, and then it's going to disappear in the long term because you're not able to consistently take action to get the result that you're looking for. And it's the same with any other change you're looking to implement. So what we need to really look at doing if we're going to implement change is we need to really just get started when we have that motivation in the first place. And you can use all the cliche like motivation's fleeting and discipline is the thing that we need to rely on. And that's all very true. And that's why I'm saying, like, for certain things like this, you will have that initial motivation where it will be high and you will want to take action. And my advice would be, instead of waiting for Monday or instead of waiting for New Year's, like, you might have motivation now, right? Like, you know, these podcasts are recorded usually a week or two before I publish them. And if you've got motivation, like, let's say after Christmas, let's say on the 27th of December or something like that, hey, maybe get started then. Maybe start going for a walk. Maybe start to eat better then. Yeah, look, you might have a New Year's bender plan that you're going to do, you know, go and have a good time with friends and things like that. But you can get 3 good days in the books of 3 or 4 or 5 days in the books of starting these habits and starting to implement these things and starting to troubleshoot some stuff so that when it rolls around to New Year's, you're able to really hit the ground running and you're really able to make a dent in it. If you start now, it's also kind of future-proofing this for when other things come up. And so with that, when you start things, when you have the motivation, it'll be easier to start and it'll be easier to take action. Because then if you wait 3, 4, 5 days and then you have the night out on New Year's, you go and see friends or whatever the case might be, the next day you're not going to necessarily feel like doing something. So then we're into the first, and then we're into the second, and then by the third you get started on something else again, and then you've got to go through this problem-solving period that you could have done a week earlier. And then all of a sudden you're back to work. And then when you're back at work, now you've got another bunch of problems that you've got to try and deal with. And then when all these things, when we're trying to implement something new, as soon as we start implementing something new, it's going to create a level of friction in our life. That is just what is going to happen with change. There is absolutely no way around it, right? We can minimize the amount of friction by having a well thought out plan, but as we start taking action and start to actually try and make change, like we've got to work some shit out by ourselves in order to actually make these things stick. And the more little roadblocks that come up, the less chance a lot of people have of continuing, and the more chance they have of actually falling off the wagon in the short term. So if you can use that initial motivation you get when you want to make a change and just get started when you are in that state of higher motivation, it can actually help you implement that long term. And it can allow you to start to create these contingencies for yourself and give yourself the permission to mess up. No one's ever going to be perfect 100% of the time. There are going to be times where you are going to fall off the wagon. There are going to be times where you're going to miss a workout, where you miss a walk, where maybe things aren't as dialed in as you want them to be in whatever area of life you're trying to make that change. And you need to give yourself the permission to mess up. And then when you do mess up, looking at that situation from a holistic standpoint, why did this happen? Is there anything I can change? What part of this is inside of my circle of control and what part is outside of it? Are there any actions I can take in the future to ensure this doesn't happen again? Or is it just something that I've just given myself permission to do? And then when you do mess up, just drawing a line in the sand and getting on with it and starting to take that action again, because it is not going to be a perfect 100% of the time. You need to understand that with these things, let's say, for example, you're trying to train more. There are going to be weeks where you aren't going to train. That's just the reality of it. No one is ever going to train every single week of their life. You are going to get sick. The kids are going to get sick. Something is going to happen and something that is going to come up, which is going to stop you from maybe doing a week or a session, maybe 2 weeks, maybe even a month. Life happens. What we need to, the biggest skill I think a lot of people need to arm themselves with is when that happens, having a look at why it happened, understanding, is this something I can control or is this something I can't? And then after that, if it is something you can control, addressing those things to either make sure that it doesn't happen in the future, or accepting the fact that you made the choice to do it and that is going to come up again and being okay with that. Or if it's something we can't control, just letting go of it. And then once we've done one of those two things, we just need to go, right, I'm just getting back to the action that I said I was going to do. Not getting wrapped around the axle, not beating yourself up, not telling yourself you're a shit human being because you didn't do something you set out to do, but just getting back to it, because that is the way you are going to build consistency long term. Those small incremental steps over a long period of time are going to be the things that will add up and that will eventually get you to the result that you're looking for, or that will eventually allow you to create a new identity around the change that you are trying to make. Create a new identity around somebody who trains consistently. I go to the gym 3 times a week. Not I'm trying to, I do. That's another thing. I did an episode probably a while ago now where I spoke about I'm doing versus I am. And that's something that maybe you need to go back and have a listen to that episode, because when you're creating change and you're trying to get things implemented, we are actually creating a new identity for ourselves. We're creating somebody who does the things that we want to do. So instead of telling yourself that I'm trying to do it, maybe you need to tell yourself that I am doing it. I am the person who does this, not I'm trying to do this. Because and with all that, you start to build up those wins. You start to stack those small wins. You start to really implement something, and you convince yourself and you show yourself that, hey, if something goes wrong, I can still continue to do this. Even though maybe I've slipped for a week or 2 weeks or whatever the case might be, I have the ability within myself to get back to it and to keep moving this thing forward. And that, for me, is how a lot of people are actually going to implement things over this period, which are going to continue to stick. You need to understand that at some point you're going to mess up. Try and find something that you're going to be able to do in a sustainable way. Look to have those small incremental wins that are going to add up over a long period of time, and don't wait for the ideal situation to come up to make the change or to take the action, because at the end of the day, even though it might be ideal now, later on down the track it's not going to be ideal, and there's always going to be something that comes up. Doesn't matter what it is, life is always going to try and throw a spanner in the works at some point, and we need to try as best we can to address that as it comes up. And if it is important to us to continue to do something, find a way of doing it, take that action, and continue to move forward. Obviously, if you need help implementing change, if there is something that is there on your radar that you would love to do, if it's training, whatever the case might be, reach out. This is something that I've obviously helped a lot of people with over the last 15 years of being a coach. I have a paid program, and I also have a lot of free resources which I'm happy to provide to you should you not have the financial means to be able to work with me on a longer term basis. But that's the point of this podcast, is to hopefully give you some tools and some tricks that are going to be usable to start to move yourself forward. Happy New Year. Hope you all had a great Christmas. Hopefully you got something out of today's episode. Let me know what you think. Follow along on the socials. Subscribe. Give us a 5-star review. And see you all in 2024.